The blow fell with the precision of a whispered curse, landing not upon flesh but upon dignity. It came in a single sentence, uttered by a jeweled matron near the ballroom hearth. A duchess without an heir is a decoration, nothing more. The words, sharpened by spite, slipped through the air and struck Eleanor, Duchess of Ashford, before she had drawn her first breath of the New Year's celebration. She stood motionless for a heartbeat, the sound of laughter swelling around her like distant thunder. Eleanor had been prepared for murmurs about her quiet nature and her preference for books over balls. But this was no idle critique. This was a verdict. A judgment spoken softly enough to feign innocence yet loudly enough for several guests to hear. The ballroom glowed with warm light, but she felt none of its comfort. She moved away from the cluster of chattering women, her posture impeccably straight despite the sting in her chest. Every step felt like walking through unfriendly eyes. They all knew she had been married nearly a year. They all knew the Duke of Ashford was expected to produce an heir. And they all believed she had failed. She swallowed hard. Marriage had placed her in the center of scrutiny she never sought. She had longed only to be a good partner, to earn affection in time. Instead, she stood accused by whispers that knew nothing of her heart. It was not as though she and the Duke lived in discord. Their arranged union was built on restraint and politeness. He ensured her comfort, spoke to her with courtesy, and kept a respectful distance so carefully measured it felt like architecture. Invisible lines seemed to separate them, drawn the day they exchanged vows. Tonight that distance felt unbearable. She slipped out of the ballroom into the quieter corridor. The music followed faintly, a muffled echo. She pressed a palm to her stomach, not in hope but in ache. She wished for a life built on closeness, but Henry Ashford had never allowed their marriage to become anything more than a harmonious arrangement. She paused beneath a portrait of a past duchess whose painted eyes looked serene. Eleanor wondered if that woman had ever known humiliation or if history had sheltered her from such pain. Footsteps approached, measured, unmistakably familiar. She turned slowly. The Duke of Ashford stood at the end of the corridor, framed by soft lamplight. Henry, tall, composed, his expression a blend of dignity and fatigue. His gaze settled on her with quiet concern. "Duchess," he said gently, "you left the ballroom rather suddenly. Are you unwell?" He always called her Duchess, never Eleanor. Names seemed to him a luxury reserved for another kind of marriage. "I needed air," she replied. The room felt heavy. His eyes lingered as though he sensed the truth yet hesitated to touch it. "I am sorry if the evening has been unkind," he said. "These gatherings can wound without intention." "Cruel would be more accurate," she murmured before she could stop herself. A flicker crossed his face, concern, perhaps guilt, but he recovered quickly. "Has someone spoken ill to you?" he asked. "Not to me," she answered. "About me." Silence stretched between them. For the first time, she saw him shift as though struck by the same words that had wounded her. "I regret that society makes sport of its assumptions," he said. "You should not have to bear them." His gentleness should have soothed her. Instead, it deepened the ache, for he cared in sentiment but not in closeness. "They judge our marriage," she whispered. "What they believe it lacks." He inhaled sharply. "Their judgments are meaningless." "Yet they echo," she said. Another silence. She dared to hope he might reach out, if only briefly, but his hands remained perfectly still. He stepped closer nonetheless, voice lower. "Eleanor." Her breath caught. He had never spoken her name like that. "I did not wish for you to suffer," he said. "If my distance has added to your burden, then I am responsible." The admission shook her more than the insult itself. "Why do you keep so far from me, Henry?" she asked, her voice barely above a breath. He froze. The simple question hung between them like fragile glass. "Because I fear what closeness may demand of a man with an uncertain future," he said quietly. She stared at him, startled by the tremor in his voice. It was the closest he had ever come to confession, yet his meaning remained veiled. She sensed something heavy beneath his restraint. "Uncertain future?" she asked. He looked away. "There are matters of health I have not spoken of. They are long-standing. I would not burden you with them." Her heart tightened. "I am your wife. Withholding hurts more than trusting." His eyes returned to hers, and for the first time she saw fear, not of society but of vulnerability. His distance was not coldness but protection, misplaced yet sincere. "I believed," he murmured, "that if I kept my heart guarded, you would suffer less should misfortune come." She stepped closer. "You assume sorrow is certain. You never considered that affection might be too." Something fragile flickered in his expression, a longing swiftly hidden. He seemed on the verge of speaking, of letting truth escape, but the swell of voices from the ballroom intruded, pulling him back into formality. "We should return," he said, though neither moved. And the moment trembled with all they had not yet dared to name. Then the midnight bells began to ring, drowning whatever courage he might have spoken next. The blow landed before dawn, not upon either of them directly, but upon the fragile reputation they shared. A footman, pale and hesitant, delivered the news while the Duke and Duchess were still recovering from the previous night's unspoken truths. Society's newest rumor claimed that their marriage had grown so cold the Duchess slept in a separate wing. Eleanor listened in silence, her breath tightening. She had not even left her chamber, yet already accusations had found her. Henry dismissed the footman with a quiet command, but the damage had been done. "This is deliberate," he muttered, pacing with uncharacteristic agitation. "Someone spreads these stories with intention, not idle amusement." Eleanor said nothing. She did not want to ask who would benefit from wounding her. She feared she already knew. Later that morning she found a letter slipped beneath her door, unsigned, written in an elegant hand, only a single line: "A duchess ignored is a duchess forsaken." The words struck harder than the gossip, for they echoed her own private fears. She tucked the note away before Henry could see it. His burdens were heavy enough. The day unfolded under a veil of unease. Henry attempted to converse with her at breakfast, offering gentle inquiries about her rest, but she answered softly, unable to meet his eyes. His confession from the night before lingered between them. She sensed he wanted to say more, yet something held him back, a wall built from old wounds and a future he feared to promise. In an effort to shake the gloom, Eleanor retreated into the estate's winter gardens. Snow clung stubbornly to the hedges, though patches of earth hinted at approaching spring. She walked the gravel path slowly, gathering her thoughts. Here, far from society's cruel tongues, she could breathe without feeling watched. But even nature could not untangle her confusion. She wished Henry trusted her enough to speak openly. She wished she trusted herself enough to ask. He joined her unexpectedly. "I hope to find you here," he said, his tone softer than the cold air around them. She stiffened, unsure whether to welcome or retreat from him. After a moment, he continued, "I have spoken with my uncle. He claims he heard the rumor in London 3 days ago." Eleanor's heart dropped. 3 days? Before the New Year's gathering? He nodded. "It did not originate here." "Then who?" she began, but he lifted a hand gently, signaling caution. "There is an eagerness among certain circles to see our marriage fail," he said. "Some would prefer the Ashford line passed through another branch." Eleanor absorbed his meaning slowly. Rival heirs. Ambitious relatives. People who saw her not as a partner but as an obstacle. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small object. "I had intended to give you this on a happier morning," he said, offering it with hesitant hands. It was a delicate silver bookmark engraved with her initials, its simplicity made tender by the care placed into it. The unexpected thoughtfulness loosened something within her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, tracing the engraving. "It is beautiful." A faint warmth touched his expression. "You mentioned losing your place in books when distracted. I hope this might help." The gesture, gentle and sincere, cracked the shell she had built around her disappointment. For the first time since their wedding, Eleanor allowed herself to believe he might be reaching toward her, however cautiously. Yet fear lingered. If someone wished to harm their standing, more rumors would come. Anne Henry, already burdened with illness and duty, might retreat from her again. Their fragile peace shattered hours later at an intimate luncheon hosted by Lady Havering, a woman renowned for smiling while delivering ruin. Eleanor attended only because her absence would fuel fresh speculation. She tried to maintain composure, but whispers pressed upon her like unseen hands. When she passed a pair of young socialites, one murmured just loud enough, "A duchess who cannot inspire affection cannot expect an heir." The other replied, "Her husband is merely courteous. Nothing more can grow from politeness." The audacity of the words stunned Eleanor, but before she could react, Henry stepped forward from behind her. His arrival was so sudden the room fell silent. "If you mean to speak of my wife," he said, voice low but cutting, "do so with the respect her title, and her character, commands." The socialites blanched. Lady Havering offered a trembling curtsy. Eleanor's pulse hammered, not from embarrassment but from the shock of his open defense. It was the boldest gesture he had ever made toward her. He guided her away from the gathering, not with urgency but with protectiveness, as though shielding her from further harm. Once outside he exhaled sharply. "Forgive me," he said. I did not intend to cause a scene. She shook her head. You protected me. He looked at her then, deeply, as though something long dormant stirred within him. I should have done so sooner. The walk back to the carriage was quiet, filled with unspoken understanding. Eleanor felt herself drawn to his steadiness, to the sincerity behind his restraint. Yet she feared this moment of courage might vanish once the day's emotion faded. Later, she found him alone in the library, staring at the dying embers of a near-spent fire. He did not notice her until she stepped closer. Henry, she said softly, I must ask something difficult. He turned slowly, guarded but attentive. Why, she continued, do you remain a stranger to your own hopes? You protect me from the world, yet you will not let me near the truth that torments you. He closed his eyes briefly as though bracing for impact. Because truths carried too long can wound even when spoken gently, he murmured. And I fear the wound I might give you. She waited, breath held, but he did not continue. Instead, he reached for her hand, only to halt inches away, fingers trembling, restraint tightening like iron. The unfulfilled gesture left the air between them charged and aching. Then a footman appeared at the door, breathless. Your Graces, he said, a message has arrived from London. It concerns the Ashford succession. Henry's face drained of color. Eleanor felt the world tilt. Whatever the letter carried, it would shatter what little certainty remained. The blow arrived not with thunder but with the quiet authority of sealed parchment. The footman's trembling hand extended the letter toward Henry, and in that suspended breath between delivery and revelation, Eleanor sensed their fragile peace unraveling. Henry broke the seal with controlled precision, though she could see the tension in his knuckles. His eyes moved across the page once, then again, slower the second time, as though the ink itself had changed in meaning. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded older than it had that morning. My cousin petitions Parliament to challenge the line of succession, he said. He claims the duchy requires an heir of unquestioned stability. Eleanor felt each word press against her ribcage like a tightening band. He dares question your right? He questions whether I am capable of securing the future, Henry replied, the quiet shame beneath his calm tone striking her more sharply than any insult spoken at Lady Havering's luncheon. He folded the letter with deliberate care, though his hand trembled. And he spreads rumors to strengthen his claim. The realization stung her. The gossip had not been mere cruelty, it had been strategy. Eleanor stepped closer. Tell me what power this petition holds. Henry met her gaze reluctantly. If Parliament accepts his claims, he could be named successor should I die without issue. The words hung between them, colder than any winter wind. She feared the phrase should I die most of all. For days she had sensed his unspoken burden. Now the shadows gathered around it plainly. Henry, she said softly, there is more you have not told me. His expression tightened, a man caught between duty and dread. If you wish the truth, he murmured, you shall have it. And for the first time since their marriage began, he did not retreat. They walked to the small salon at the end of the west corridor, a room rarely used except during stormy evenings. Today, though the sky outside remained unchanged, an inner storm demanded its shelter. Henry waited until the door closed before he spoke. My father suffered from a hereditary ailment. I inherited it young. The physicians predicted a shortened life, though they could not name its exact course. Eleanor's breath faltered. You believed you would not live long enough to be a true husband, he finished quietly. To give you a future built on anything but uncertainty. She pressed a hand to her lips. You let me believe you were indifferent, she whispered. You let society believe it. Indifference is a shield often mistaken for cruelty, he said. I thought distance would spare you. It wounded instead. His shoulders lowered in a gesture halfway to defeat. Yes, he whispered. I see that now. For a moment neither spoke. The truth, bare, unguarded, lay between them, pulsing with its own fragile life. Eleanor stepped toward him until she felt his breath stir the air between them. Do you regret marrying me? The question escaped her before she could dress it in gentler tone. Henry's eyes widened, startled. No, he said, his voice breaking in a way she had never heard. I have cherished our marriage in silence, even as I feared binding you to sorrow. Sorrow finds us all eventually, she murmured. But love must be chosen. His breath hitched. Eleanor, but her courage surged, born of heartbreak and hope entwined. You kept me at a distance for fear of losing me. Yet you never considered you might lose me through silence. His composure cracked, if only for a heartbeat. You are right. The admission felt like a confession wrested from years of restraint. I have lived behind walls built long before I met you. I did not know how to lower them without collapsing entirely. A memory flickered through her, how he had defended her at the luncheon, how his voice had trembled not with anger but fear. You defended me today, she said. Without hesitation. It was long overdue. Then let the overdue become the beginning. His eyes softened, a turbulence beneath the calm exterior. I am afraid, he said simply. Not of illness nor succession, but of wanting more than circumstance allows. She reached out slowly, offering her hand not as demand but invitation. Henry stared at her fingers as though they were a lifeline. When he finally took her hand, it was gentle, reverent, as though he feared she might vanish. The warmth of his skin startled her with its sincerity. The silence between them shifted, no longer tense but intimate. I never wished to live separate from you, she whispered. I only wished to understand you. And I never wished you to suffer for my secrecy, he replied. Yet I made you suffer all the same. Outside, a wind brushed against the window pane, a soft sigh from the world beyond. Henry lifted her hand slowly to his chest, pressing it over his heartbeat. This, he said quietly, I feared to offer you. For if you held it fully, I feared you would one day feel it fail. Her voice trembled. And if it failed without ever being offered? Would that wound me less? He closed his eyes, a man undone by truth. You deserve a husband who loves you in daylight, not in shadows. The words lodged in her heart like light piercing a long-dimmed chamber. Then choose daylight, Henry, she whispered. Choose now while the choice remains yours. He opened his eyes slowly as though seeing her anew. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition, longing, the shared ache of lost time. He drew her gently into an embrace, not rushed, not uncertain. A promise made in silence. They held each other as though winter itself might shatter around them. For the first time, Eleanor felt not the distance of duty but the closeness of two hearts long held apart. At length, Henry pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. Eleanor, he said, voice low, there is one more truth I must tell you. She braced herself. The physicians were wrong in one regard. They told me I would never father a child. Her pulse stopped. Never? That is what I believed, he whispered. It is what everyone believes. A tremor moved through her, a blend of fear and astonishment. Then, if ever there were hope, he said, I have long buried it. But before she could respond, before she could ask the question suddenly screaming within her, a distant bell rang from the front hall, urgent and insistent. A messenger had arrived from London, bearing news that could alter everything they had just begun to rebuild. The blow came before Henry had fully crossed the threshold of the entrance hall. The messenger, breathless from travel, delivered the document with a single dreaded phrase, immediate consideration by Parliament, Your Grace. It struck harder than any rumor, for this was no whisper in a drawing room, this was law reaching toward their lives with cold authority. Henry accepted the papers with a composure so thin it seemed a miracle they did not tear in his hands. Eleanor watched from the staircase, her grip tightening on the banister. She had hoped their moment of honesty would steady them. Instead, the world had chosen this hour to shake. When Henry finally looked up at her, the exhaustion in his eyes revealed the truth. The reprieve they'd found in each other had lasted only minutes before the world demanded they surrender it. We will read this together, she said, descending the last steps. Her voice steadied him more than she knew. They walked toward his study side by side, not touching, but no longer strangers navigating the same silence. The study door closed behind them with the weight of an inevitable reckoning. Henry scanned the petition line by line. Eleanor read over his shoulder, her breath catching at the phrasing. Ill-suited to secure the succession, uncertain constitution, inability to produce lawful issue. Each word felt designed to wound. Henry exhaled slowly. This is bolder than I expected. It is crueler than you deserve, she replied. He shook his head, a faint, almost weary smile crossing his lips. Cruelty has never surprised me. What surprises me is how much it matters now. The sentence lingered between them. Eleanor understood. Before he might have borne the insult alone. But now, after truth, after tenderness, after the tremulous promise of closeness, he feared what the world's judgment might do to her. She placed a hand lightly on the desk, not reaching for him but grounding herself as she said, Tell me what must be done. He looked at her then, truly looked as though seeing her courage for the first time. We must present unity, he said. We must show Parliament that our marriage stands unshaken. Eleanor swallowed. Does it? The question held no accusation, only longing. Henry stepped closer, the distance of months folding into inches. "It stands," he said, "because of you." But unity, however heartfelt, could not quiet her body's sudden betrayals. By midday, Eleanor felt the first wave of nausea rising like an abrupt shift in tide. She excused herself from a meeting with their solicitor, her hand pressed against her ribs. In the privacy of her chamber, she sat on the edge of her bed, breathing through the discomfort. The room tilted once, twice. She closed her eyes until the dizziness passed. When Henry came searching for her, concern sharpened his usually measured steps. "You're pale," he said, kneeling beside her. "I only need a moment," she murmured. "Fatigue, nothing more." But he did not look convinced. "You have been unwell for days," he said. "Something is wrong." She touched his hand lightly. "Not wrong," she said, though she could not explain the conviction stirring beneath the unease. "Only different." Henry struggled between worry and restraint, torn by the instinct to protect and the fear of losing what they had just begun to rebuild. "I have failed you," he whispered. "If the strain of this petition has harmed your health, do not blame yourself," she interrupted softly. "You are not responsible for every shadow that falls across my path." His guilt deepened. "I should have been easier to lean on." "Then begin now," she said. "Begin with truth, not fear." The physician arrived in late afternoon, summoned at Henry's insistence. Eleanor lay on the chaise while Henry stood at a distance that suggested both guardian and supplicant. He watched every movement of the physician's hands with the vigilance of a man waiting for a verdict that might sentence his heart. The examination was brief yet strangely reverent. When the physician straightened, Eleanor sensed a shift in the air, subtle but unmistakable. Henry took one uncertain step forward. "Tell me," he said. The physician bowed his head respectfully. "Your Grace, there is no cause for alarm. The Duchess's symptoms indicate no sickness." Eleanor exhaled shakily. Relief washed over her until the physician spoke his next words. Words that transformed relief into trembling disbelief. "She is with child." Silence descended like a held breath. Henry stood motionless, the world narrowing to that single revelation. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken, not with fear but with a fragile, astonishing hope. She looked at Henry expecting shock, yet what she saw instead was something deeper, something unguarded and luminous: wonder. His lips parted soundlessly. He pressed a hand against the desk to steady himself. "A child?" he whispered. "My child?" The physician nodded. "Indeed, Your Grace. A most fortunate circumstance." When the physician departed, Henry remained frozen in place, as though movement might shatter the miracle. Eleanor waited, her heart pounding. Finally he lifted his gaze to hers. 1,000 emotions flickered through his expression: astonishment, gratitude, fear, joy so fierce it threw shadows behind it. He stepped toward her slowly as though approaching something sacred. "Eleanor," he said, barely breathing her name. "You carry our child." She nodded, tears rising without sorrow. "Yes." His composure finally broke. He dropped to his knees before her, hands trembling as they hovered near hers. "I had no right to hope for this," he whispered. "Yet hope found us." She reached for him, guiding his hands to her. The warmth of his touch made the moment real. "This child is not a correction to what society claims," she said. "This child is a promise, one we made without knowing." He bowed his head against her hands, as though offering his gratitude directly into her skin. "You have given me my future," he murmured. "And I swear I will not waste a single moment of it." But even as joy flooded the room, the petition on the desk remained, a reminder that the world, ambitious and merciless, would not retreat quietly. Henry rose slowly, his expression shifting from awe to resolve. "Parliament must hear of this," he said. "They must know the line is secured." Eleanor nodded. "And your cousin?" "He will not surrender his claim easily," Henry replied. Before she could speak, a knock sounded at the study door, urgent, insistent, unmistakably foreboding. It was the sound of conflict returning, demanding entry into the fragile miracle they had just discovered.
Thunder cracked through the manor as if the sky itself had chosen to split open, and the echo jolted Eleanor upright before she realized she had been trembling already. The storm arrived without warning, hurling rain against the windows in wild sheets that sounded like a warning too pointed to ignore. Henry paced before the cold hearth, unread letters scattered across the carpet where they had fallen from his hands. News from Parliament had come at dawn, and though he had not spoken a direct explanation yet, the dread in his eyes told her that the message carried danger. He did not lift his head when she approached, but he stilled, as though the nearness of her presence offered enough steadiness to keep him from splintering. She touched his arm lightly, feeling the tension that had wound itself through him like twisted wire. "Tell me," she said. Her voice was quiet but not fragile. Henry drew a breath that shuddered before it settled. "The petition has gained traction," he said. "My cousin has secured the support of several members who now question the legitimacy of our marriage and the future of the succession." Eleanor felt the room tilt sharply. She steadied herself with a hand on the mantel, though her pulse had begun racing with such ferocity she wondered if Henry could hear it. "They doubt the child?" she asked, forcing the words past rising fear. Henry shook his head slowly. "Not openly. But they imply that the timing is too convenient, that my years of presumed barrenness make this suspicious." Eleanor's breath caught. The insult was not merely to Henry but to the fragile miracle growing inside her. "What do they intend?" she whispered. Henry hesitated, and that hesitation alone frayed her courage. "A formal inquiry into everything." A cold, nauseating wave rolled through her, stronger than any morning sickness. The very idea that strangers would dissect their private lives, their truths, their vulnerabilities, felt like a new kind of violence. Henry reached for her hand, but not quickly enough to disguise the tremor in his own. "I will not allow them to harm you," he said. "Or the child." His vow steadied her, but only briefly, for another flash of thunder rattled the windows, and with it came a knock at the front door so forceful it reverberated through the floorboards. Eleanor felt her breath stall beneath her. Henry moved before she could, striding into the hall with the authority of a man determined to shield his family. Eleanor followed close enough to hear every word. The butler opened the doors, revealing Lord Alastair, Henry's cousin, drenched from rain yet wearing triumph like a second coat. "I thought it best to deliver the news personally," Alastair said, brushing past the threshold without invitation. "Parliament has agreed to hear my motion immediately." Henry's jaw tightened. "You overstep." Alastair smiled, cold and thin. "I simply protect what is rightfully mine should your situation prove irregular in the eyes of many." Eleanor stepped forward before Henry could answer, her calm cutting through the tension like a blade honed by truth. "The succession is not yours to covet," she said. Alastair's gaze swept her figure with a calculating chill that made her spine stiffen. "We shall see," he replied. "The inquiry may reveal more than you expect." His insinuation dripped with malice. Henry advanced, lowering his voice to a lethal whisper. "Leave before I forget civility." For a moment, Alastair hesitated, then smirked, tipped his hat toward Eleanor with mock courtesy, and retreated into the storm, leaving the doors yawning open behind them. The wind rushed in, scattering papers and chilling the hall, but Eleanor hardly noticed, for Henry's shoulders had sagged under the weight of everything unspoken. She placed a hand against his back, feeling the controlled rise and fall of his breath. "He cannot break us," she said. Henry turned to her, eyes dark with both fear and gratitude. "He will try," he answered. "And Parliament will listen." She wanted to deny it, to insist that truth alone would shield them, but she could not pretend ignorance of the world they lived in. "Then we stand together," she said with resolve. They returned to the study, closing the doors against the storm and the residue of Alastair's malice. Henry dropped into the chair before his desk, elbows braced on his knees, hands pressed against his brow. Eleanor knelt before him, gently pulling his hands away so she could see his face. "I am not afraid of inquiry," she said. "I am afraid only of fighting this battle alone." Something softened in Henry's expression, a vulnerability he rarely allowed the world to glimpse. "You should not have to fight at all," he murmured. "But if you insist, I will not falter ever." Eleanor rose and rested her palm over her abdomen, feeling the faintest flutter of possibility deep within. "This child already lives within a storm," she said. "Let their strength begin with ours." Henry followed her gaze, all returning to his features. He moved to her side, one hand hovering near hers before settling gently atop it. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to quiet, as though the world itself paused to witness their resolve. But then footsteps echoed in the corridor, quick, sharp, urgent. Eleanor looked toward the door just as it opened without waiting for permission from the guard. The guard stepped inside, face pale, breath uneven from running. Henry stiffened. "What is it?" he demanded. The guard swallowed hard before answering. "Your Grace, a rider has just arrived from London. Parliament has accelerated the timetable. The inquiry begins tomorrow at dawn." Eleanor felt her knees weaken. Tomorrow. So soon. Henry caught her hand before she could sway, anchoring her with a steadying grip. "We will be ready," he said, though his voice trembled around the edges. The guard hesitated. "There is more," the rider said. "Your cousin has provided new evidence." Henry's grip tightened painfully around her fingers.